我哋現在夠鐘又夠法定人數啦，現在開會嚇。
Members, we form a quorum. Let's start our meeting. Today we have two sessions. After this session, we'll take a 10-minute break. The next session will start at 5:25 p.m. I'd like to remind members, if in respect of the items that we are going to deal with, you have direct or indirect pecuniary interest, Peace Act in accordance with Rule 83A of our Rules of Procedure. That is disclose the nature of the interest before you speak. And please also note the requirements under Rule 84 in respect of voting when you have a direct pecuniary interest. Let's continue with FCR 2017-1810. Members are invited to recommend to increase to approve the paper endorsed by the PWSC, and that is PWSC 2016-17-43, and in order to increase the approved project estimate of 63 TR by the $847.7 million from $6.2549 billion to $7.1026 billion in money of the day prices at the PWSC meetings are held on the 16th, 22nd of March and 5th of April. 4 hours and 70 minutes was spent on this item, and 4 information papers have been submitted by the government, and the relevant minutes as well as the information papers have been uploaded to our website for downloading. So the FC has also spent 4 hours on this particular item on the 9th of June. I'd like to remind members that please make sure that your questions are relevant to this item, and avoid repetitions or questions and points already made at the PWC meetings. I'd like to welcome the team led by Mr. Yao Singmo, Undersecretary for Transport and Housing. Do you have a point of order, Ms. Quadimo? Yes, I know the chairman has the right to shuffle the order of items before the FC, and now you allow the item on a Kai-Tak sports ground to jump the queue. Usually this is done because there is a great urgency. But please tell us what urgency there will be, because they don't have anything. They've not done anything about the tendering or the design. What's wrong with the idea of asking them to queue up properly? Well, according to the information from the administration, the closing date of the tendering is 21st of July. If it's not approved by then, another round will take at least 8 months, and there will be additional cost of $800 million to $1.2 billion. There are 3 items before the Kai-Tak one. They can queue up later without affecting the items concerned. Well, we always respect the administration's right to decide the order of items, because they have the full picture of Hong Kong in mind. Have you issued this paper to members? Yes, but we have issued quite a few papers to members. Maybe they are too busy to read this. But this reason is not convincing. But you just take it up as it is. You are saying that it's better for the government to decide the order. Then there's no need for meetings like this. But I would say that as a matter of past record, we have never tried to interfere with the ordering of items. Maybe there was such a precedent at the PWSC where the other items other than the one that the administration wanted us to consider were retracted because they decide what to put before this committee. So I don't see how much good can come out of this argument. Mr. Chu Hoi-tik, they have given us a paper saying that if the sports grounds item cannot be completed within a certain deadline, certain consequences will follow. But as we said, there are dozens behind this one. Maybe the government can tell us in respect of those dozens of items what their deadlines will be and what consequences will follow if they were not completed. Or is it that they can only say this in respect of the sports ground item and not the other items? You can say, for example, for these 60 items, they have all sorts of deadlines and all sorts of consequences if they were not completed or endorsed in time. Well, when items... Well, we are talking about items already endorsed by the PwC. So we are talking about the sports ground item, and precisely, that's precisely the order they want. Chairman, maybe you are not having all the information you need. I've been tracking the tendering price index, and I see a downward trend. It's not as indicated by the government that the deferring the tendering schedule would result in higher prices. I think we should ask them to explain why. They are saying that it's going to be more expensive. Well, of course, I don't think that the government should lie or would lie. The civil servants are permanent officials. If every time I have to assess whether the government's claim is true or not, then our job will be very difficult. Well, we are here to monitor the government. Well, it's in black and white. Please give us information to point out that the government's claim is false. Perhaps you should make a ruling that they should not be allowed to jump the queue. Well, I have accepted the proposal. I'm not going to change my decision. Unless you have evidence to say otherwise, then I will be I'll be more cautious, or I will have doubts next time they make the same claim. Last time we have Dr. Kwok Kao-kei, who will be given 3 minutes. We have Kwok Kao-kei in the queue, 3 minutes. Well, this SCL project is totally messy. This is not a question of price adjustment or cost. It's about the mistake committed in the ground investigation. And NTRCL and the government misled us at the last meeting, saying that the interest is $4.2 million, and then it was confirmed that the figure had been blown up. Now we're talking about $847.7 million to be funded by the public purse. Do we have anyone from the Highways Department, or shall we put this to the chief engineer? Is this sum, $847.7 million, the money to be spent on claims? If it's about claims, we should find out who's responsible for this. If it's the MTRCL, or its contractor, or the contractor for the ground investigation, then they should shoulder this sum instead of asking the public to pay for it. Secondly, we are most concerned about creating a precedent. Then all projects, whether we're talking about the principal contractor, in this case MTRCL, or other subcontractors, if they did things wrong, they could just ask the government to foot the bill. And if this finance committee will become an ATM machine, and this chairman of ours will allow the government to withdraw whatever money is needed. So what kind of principle are we upholding? First question is this related to claims? Director of Highways. When certain situation give rise to the need to carry out certain works not covered by the contract with the main contractor or the subcontractors of MTRCL, then the contractor or contractors concerned can make claims. And also, in this case, there are many such instances. So there is an element of claims in this instance. All right, you are the custodian of public money. So are you saying that all the responsibility will be shouldered by the Highways Department, and that is to say you? Or if there's something that has to be done which is outside the ambit of the contract? You know that we have entrusted this project to the MTRCL, and therefore we have the responsibility to look carefully into such so-called claims are justified. In this respect, I would like to ask the MTRCL to supplement. Well, you have exceeded your time. Maybe you can leave it to the next one. Mr. Jeremy Tam, 3 minutes. I would like members to flip to page 9 of the paper. Last time, I asked a question about Jacobs, which was involved in the Hong Kong-Zhuhai-Macau Bridge falsification incident, and asked whether Jacobs was involved in this SCL project. And my reply, the reply I got was Jacobs was not involved. And if you look at enclosure 4, and that is to say that there were 4 people helping with the geological work in 2016, and also Jacobs was also involved, was also engaged to do the inspection in terms of site supervision. And that is the supervision on the investigation work. Last time at the PWSC, I asked for this report from Gammons. This is about ground investigation, geological investigation to calculate the project expenditure. So it's not true to say that the Jacobs did not participate in any project. The budget overspending has a lot to do with this investigation report conducted by Gammons, because it turned out not to be accurate, and therefore there was overspending. Last time you said this company was not involved, and then you sort of talk about seconded people. And in the document, you said no, but you said something else in enclosure 4. I would like to remind the government and the MTRCL that this is a matter of concern to many members. If we do not deal with this carefully and properly, we are going to waste the meeting time today, because the questions would likely be repeated. So I'll give you 5 minutes for elucidations. Thank you for giving us more time to explain. Please take a good look at the paper, and that is page 9. There are 2 parts. In respect of MTRCL, it's the one a large paragraph has been referred to by the member. The MTRC said that that Jacobs was involved in some work, but not in respect of supervision or monitoring. And then this second part is about participation in the monitoring of SCL by the government. So Jacobs was not involved in government supervision of the project. So there are two parts: the entrusted project to be carried out by MTRCL, and the second part, the supervision by the government. So the Jacobs did take part in the first aspect, but not in respect of site supervision. And then secondly, it did not participate in the government's supervision. I would like to ask MTRCL to explain what they were referring to in enclosure 4 and why it was consistent with what they said last time. MTRCL? Jacobs' participation in the advanced work of SCL can be summarized as follows. Through a short-term contract, we contract out the work of 6 geological personnel from Jacobs. Every time after a blasting work is completed, we will register the geological conditions, and they were involved in the site in preparation and documentation. In 2009, when we started the initial design for SCL, the investigation work was led by the MTRCL's register engineer, and a professional team was commissioned to carry out the work. And they were people from Jacobs to help with site supervision and safety job. And this is provided through a contract between MTRCL and Jacobs. Let me stress, whether it's Jacobs or other contractors or other consultants, when they were commissioned to do some job for our MTRCL, that will have someone there to do the ultimate checking. And this time, the unfavorable underground condition is one of the reasons of the budget overspending. But the Jacobs did not participate in the collection of rock samples by Gammons or the drilling of holes. So we have kept all the core samples, rock core samples, and our internal team has reviewed and verified the findings. Mr. Tam, maybe you can press the button and queue up again. Dr. Hannah Wong. I'm also concerned about the rock ground investigation of MOT station. It says that the rock layer is higher than expected. You need to spend some $200 million. This is related to claims.
咁我想問呢，就係話其實嗰個嘅勘探同埋取
the collection of core samples and the investigation, was it done by the government, or was a contractor of the MTRC did it?
What I want to know is the final outcome of the excavation. Is it that the result was different from the result when investigation was done, and who did the investigation? Before commencement of works, we needed to conduct ground investigations, and the buildings department is required to engage a registered engineer to undertake ground investigation. In this funding application, the registered geotechnical engineer specified in this application is the engineer of MTRCL. Once ground investigation is completed, work will be handed over to the contractor, who is recognized or qualified contractor for ground investigation. And in the process, the MTRCL is also engaged in the ground investigation work. Once this is completed, we then need to conduct an analysis which involves assessing the ground condition, and this process is done under our guidance and also the consultant's guidance. And after the analysis is completed, we will submit the result to the government departments, including the buildings department, for completing the ground condition report. And then in the tendering process, this report will be submitted to the contractor, and then the works procedures will be decided based on this ground condition report. Now, about ground investigation, you say that this is undertaken by the engineer of MTRCL, and you must have discussed with the government. But the report is different from the real situation. Why is it that at the end of the day, the administration should bear the cost or the cost overrun or the claim amount for this error? MTRCL. Thank you, Chairman. As I explained just now, for ground investigation works, qualified and professional geotechnical engineers and consultancies should be engaged, and we follow the administration's guidelines. But we should bear in mind that ground investigation only took place at a certain location, and the depth of the bedrock may not truly reflect the situation in the whole area. And that explains the discrepancy of the ground investigation report and the real situation. Please reset the clock first 3 minutes. I'd like the administration to explain this, because ground investigation was conducted by the MTRCL itself, and you now explain that there is a discrepancy. So, about deciding the location of hole drilling, well, it was decided by you, and we now are required to foot the bill because of this discrepancy. It's a professional misjudgment leading to this discrepancy. Why didn't you conduct the investigation in a more accurate manner? Why did you decide to take samples from that location in your ground investigation? Information obtained from the ground investigation which did not tally with the reality. While this happens, the whole layer of rock may vary a lot. Usually every 15 or 30 meters a hole will be drilled for ground investigation, and the variation as recorded might be quite substantial. So a professional decided on the location of investigation, and it was up to the professional to decide how deep the investigation should go. Well, if a professional was engaged, then why would there still be such a discrepancy? As I mentioned just now, ground investigation could only be conducted at a certain interval, and as I explained just now, we have a special layer of a rock underground in Hong Kong, and the variation might be substantial. In particular, at Admiralty Station, there are site constraints. As such, we were only able to conduct ground investigations with limitations, and that accounts for the discrepancy. I think that no matter how you told us how professional that the work was, is still unacceptable. It's not the government's fault. Even during tendering, you should know how far the interval should be when a rock sample was taken. Why is it that your estimates differ? Is it unfair for the government to foot the bill for this discrepancy? No matter how professional, how able you are, you should factor in this additional expenditure in your bid, in the tender exercise. It is unfair for the government to foot the bill when additional costs have arisen. Well, generally, if variation takes place because of unforeseen ground conditions, the extra cost should be borne by the landlord, because according to the contract, well, if this cost is to be borne by the contractor, then the tender sum might be very substantial, and it may not truly reflect the actual ground condition. From the information we obtained in the ground investigation exercise, we tried to provide this information to contractors during tendering. And as I explained just now, the ground condition has not changed. But then the actual situation might not have been reflected in the ground investigation exercise. But even if the reality was reflected in the tender brief, the tender bid, the price might be very high. Well, for construction projects in Hong Kong, ground investigations are necessary. And if what you said is right, and the geo guide compiled by the government is also right, then it is due to your incompetence or inadequate ground investigation. In other words, you don't need to be responsible. And all the tender bids are inaccurate. I'm making this suggestion. Well, I don't know if the Highways Department or the Geotechnical Engineering Office can tell me this. Because of this inaccuracy, the MTRCL and other contractors very often would encounter unfavorable ground conditions, leading to frequent cost overruns to be borne by the owner, namely the general public. Then I think we should just throw away the geo guide too, because it is useless. You're telling us that you have followed the guide and that the problem remains. Well, I asked about the claim, because in the event of a claim, then there must be fault on a party. Now, is it because of the government's fault, putting forward the wrong guide, so that the contractor has done something wrong, and that we can accuse the administration of incompetence? For the geo guide too, previously, the Permanent Secretary for Development also explained that the geo guide sets out minimum requirements, whereas during actual ground investigation work, the professional must make the final decision based on the actual circumstances on the site. For example, if there is great variation of the ground condition, such that during ground investigation, the variation is not correctly identified, then there may be a discrepancy in the outcome. Does it mean that somebody has faulted in this incident? It may not necessarily be the case, because for a claim to be substantiated, it means that it is not covered by the contract as to what the contractor should take up in the contract. Now, it is related to the sharing of risks. If we put all the burden of risks on the contractor because of the foreseeable risks, the premium may be reflected in the tender price. So it is not the case that we are transferring all the risks to contractors such that we can get the best bid possible. Ms. Claudia Mo, 3 minutes. Well, I am slightly worried after hearing all these remarks. It seems that it's nothing but gambling. We are putting ourselves at risk, and if you want the contractor to shoulder the risks, then the tender price would be very high. But in fact, the government is responsible. The owner is the government. The site belongs to the government, and now something has gone wrong, and they are filing a claim. I repeatedly asked the same question. Well, it is said that the geoguide is inaccurate, and the ground investigation report is also different from the reality. But anyway, because of this cost overrun, you're applying for additional funding, and the government should foot the bill, meaning that we should foot the bill. It doesn't just happen to Sha-Tin Central Link. We have a number of railway projects and other projects, such as the West Kowloon Cultural District, the XRL Terminus. Well, you talk about the granite bedrock, and then we have repeated the same argument over and over. It is not desirable. But this is my criticism. Now, my question is this. Let's say for the Sha-Tin Central Link project, you're asking for additional funding, and you are just deploying tactics to manipulate the books so as to cover your mistakes as far as administration is concerned. Then what is your answer, Undersecretary? Well, we're definitely not playing a trick in applying for additional funding. It is justified as set out in the paper because of the difficulties in implementing the project. The expenses are clearly set out. We have not played any trick, and all the figures are provided in the paper submitted to the Finance Committee in the format and in the breakdown so requested. I'd like to explain a bit more about railway projects. For example, for Sha-Tin Central Link in To Kwa Wan, all of a sudden some historic relics were found, and this is something unforeseen when we conducted the initial ground investigation. No matter how accurate the ground investigation and advance works were carried out, it doesn't mean that when it comes to actual excavation works, the picture would be completely in line with the picture presented in the report. So just like Sha-Tin Central Link, after discovery of historic relics, and we need to pay extra to preserve the relics. And if the public agrees that we should spend money on this, then we inevitably will come back for additional funding. Mr. Roy Kwong. The problem is, are we going to spend public money on projects that have repeatedly experienced cost overruns? It seems to be the norm. You say that this is unforeseen. Well, isn't it the case that the Geo Guide is already out of date and you should update it, Under Secretary? You have time and again come back for additional funding, and if this is not approved, then starting from next month you need to pay a monthly interest of some $4 million. But our question is how you can prevent repeated cost overruns. You just now said that this is unforeseen, and then you explained that no matter how accurate the Geo Guide is, you may not be able to avoid this problem. But let's not shun the question. Do you admit that the Geo Guide is so outdated such that when it comes to actual implementation of works, you encounter problems, and as a result, you incur such a huge cost overrun? Second question, what can be done to prevent another repeat of cost overrun? Don't take us as the ATM. Well, may I ask Mr. Kwong to refer to the latest paper? We have set out in the paper the projects undertaken in the past decade, and for projects with cost overruns, they only constitute a small portion. We want to avoid cost overruns as well, but it is not the case that there is cost overrun in every project, and on the whole, the government have been able to save costs, as explained in the paper. About the Geo Guide, that's your second question, be it the Public Works Subcommittee or the Finance Committee, at the meetings, members have already expressed this view, and our department, and we have already relayed this view to the Geotechnical Engineering Office under the Development Bureau to see whether there is a need to update the Geo Guide. There have been previous updates, and we have reflected members' views to them. Third point, may I elaborate on this as to how we can minimize the chance of cost overrun or to minimize inaccuracy or discrepancies. I'll defer to the MTRCL to supplement. Thank you, Chairman. As far as the Geo Guide is concerned, we have undertaken a number of projects, and we have also considered how we can improve its accuracy. For example, in terms of ground investigation, whether it's necessary to make the intervals shorter or to dig deeper, and also whether we should engage a professional to analyze whether there is a need to drill more holes. Well, you talked about collating figures in the past 10 years, and the cost overrun situation is not really serious. Can you tell me in person by how much have we paid extra in cost overruns? For page 2 of the paper, in relation to the expenditure of public works according to the Development Bureau over the past 10 years, the Finance Committee approved 650 Category A projects amounting to some $770 billion, and the additional funding amounted to $60 billion. That is to say, about 10% of projects require additional funding. $60 billion, Chairman, but we're talking about a period of 10 years. So is it money well spent, Mr. Roy Kwong? You can press the button and speak again. Another 3 minutes. Would you like to ask further questions? Yes.
I would like to continue answering. In the past 10 years, we have saved money. Well, in some areas we spent more, in other areas we spent fewer, and we have saved $30 billion. So when it comes to managing all the projects, I don't think the government's performance is bad. And at the end of the day, we have saved taxpayers' money. Is it my turn, Chairman? Yes. Well, it's very simple. Now you're bold enough to tell me that in the past 10 years there was a cost overrun of $60 billion, but you have saved $30 billion. It's not your money, it's Hong Kong taxpayers' money. It seems that it's very normal. In the past 10 years there was just a cost overrun of $60 billion. Well, Chairman, even if Hong Kong is very wealthy, our money will be all spent on these white elephant projects. So I asked you how come there's a cost overrun, and you said that is because of the unfavorable ground condition, and there's something wrong with the investigation. So every time it's the same. It's about the ground condition. So can you solve this problem? You always come back for more funding. You just told us that in the past 10 years it's just $60 billion. So for the TV audience, I think they will be startled, and I would need another 3 minutes to scold you. Under Secretary, $60 billion is not your money. It's not like you have done us a favor, and we haven't been doing that bad. We have saved $30 billion for you. Well, it's your job to save money. Cost overrun is wrong. You cannot just tell us proudly that in the past 60 years, it's just $60 billion. Now, if you spend $60 billion on welfare, then a lot of people would have been helped. How about the have-nots? How about public housing? Do I have to cite all these examples? May I answer, Chairman? I hope the member can be more objective when it comes to the management of public projects. Well, I'm very objective. $60 billion is the blood and sweat of taxpayers. Well, you are saying that we have to put in additional funding, but for the net value, we have saved money. How much? $30 billion. Thank you. Professor Yu Chung-Yim. Under Secretary, can you take a look at the paper? Is it a forged paper? Attachment 3, Table 1 and 2. Just now, you were talking about cost overrun. Item 1. Project 6178TH. And then it's $101.43 million. And then 6582TH is the same. The figure, all the figures are the same. How coincidental. Well, when you seek additional funding, all the amounts are the same. Is it a forged document? Under Secretary, well, we get these figures from the Development Bureau. I can try to find out what the actual situation is. Well, these are not fake figures. Well, for this kind of report, it's actually very misleading. If you use the same window of time, then you will always underestimate the cost because you haven't taken the previous additional fundings into account, and for the future additional fundings you haven't included that, so that's why your estimate is lower, and we call it a rolling window in the research field. We won't just truncate the period 206 to 220 06 to 2026. When I look at the figures, they are all wrong. How come all these figures are the same? This document itself is a forged one if you tell me these figures are right. Chairman, I'll follow up on this. the member pointed out certain issues with the figures, and I'll follow up on that. Under Secretary, I think this accusation is very serious. You should do it as soon as possible. Ask your colleague to call the office. If you cannot clarify this point, it's very difficult for us to vote. A lot of members will follow up on this. Well, I would like to remind members that I have received 837A motion. If members want to do that, please submit your motion to me as soon as possible. Well, Chairman, this is additional information. It's not totally related to the SCL. Well, we are looking at the whole picture. That is, in the past years, what has the government's performance been when it comes to public projects management, and they are not directly related to the SCL. We are just responding to members' queries. So this information is not completely related. Well, this is a huge accusation. I would like to clarify. Well, for Enclosure 3, that's the response from the Development Bureau, and there are 2 attachments. And it's about the same figures concerning 2 projects. For Enclosure 1, it's about the past 10 years. What kind of projects have been approved? And there are 650 projects, and eventually the amount approved by the FC. So for 6178TH, so it's $143.5 million, and then which for the next one is for 70 projects which need additional funding, and after the additional funding, the amount approved eventually by the FC. So we can see 6178TH. And why is it also $143.5 million? Because we are talking about the same project, and that's the amount approved by the FC eventually. So this is the fact, and you should understand it this way. So I think Mr. Yu Chung-Yim would have to digest it a bit. And Mr. Lo Wai-Kwok, Chairman, I don't need 5 minutes. Just now for Enclosure 1 and 2, I think the government has clarified. So for Enclosure 1 is the approved amount, and for some projects there was no additional funding. As for Enclosure 2, for those with additional funding, the figure is the eventual funding after final approval. And I think Dr. Yu Chung-Yim is interested in the additional funding. I don't think it's that difficult, because we would know what the eventual amount is, and we also know what the original application amount is. Just now, the Undersecretary has explained to us. In the past 10 years, a number of projects have been approved, and for some of them, you needed additional funding, and for some other projects, there have been savings. On the whole, there was a saving of $30 billion. I think that's a good news to us. On the other hand, we of course hope that the estimates can be more accurate. That is, if you don't come here for additional funding, that would be more ideal. I understand that many members here have administrative experience. So when it comes to estimates, we would make it tight. And that's why you may see cost overrun, because in the beginning is calculated tightly. But if you do not want cost overrun, you would have a bigger estimate in the beginning, but people don't want to see that. Well, I have done administrative work for many years, and I'm also a professional engineer. I think that we have to be very careful about this. And when it comes to ground investigation, how many samples do we need? We have to strike a balance. If you want to know the ground condition very thoroughly, of course you need as many samples as possible. But for construction works, if you do that, then the cost will go up. If we look at the present standards, there may be some uncertainties. That is, the ground condition may be more complicated than what you see during investigation. But if you want to have very accurate information in the first place, then it would be more expensive because it's a very complicated task. So I think the government should review these and see if a balance should be struck. Now, there are projects which suffer cost overrun, but if you think that because of this we have to totally change the ground investigation method, then I don't think it's worth it. As for enclosures 1 and 2, I think we still need more information. So I hope that supplementary paper can be provided to us afterwards. Yes, we would provide those information to members. But I would like to stress that this is not related to this project. Yes, we would like to thank the engineer representative for giving us the information. Well, Chairman, we are spending time on discussing this because there will be more similar projects and we will be seeing similar scenarios. That is, the ground investigation findings may be different from the actual ground conditions. So for the tendering document, well, you got your contractor and then you sign a contract. In the contract, have you stated this? That is, if the ground conditions turn out to be different from the investigation findings, and if it's more expensive to do the job, then the government would have to foot the bill. But what if the ground conditions are actually simpler and you don't have to dig that deep? Then would the construction cost go down and would money be returned to the government? I want to know what is written in the contract. MTRCL? Well, for ground investigation, in the beginning, a qualified geotechnical engineer will do the design. When drilling is done, all the geotechnical data will be verified. Now, if the geotechnical engineering company complies with all the requirements, then the data can be used for geological analysis. But for drilling information, it would only show the condition of the drilling area, but it cannot reflect the complete picture before excavation, in particular if the ground conditions are very complicated. Mr. Michael Tian, Chairman, last time I asked MTLCL. Now that's a cost overrun of $800 million, and a big part of it is related to the MOT station. Well, in your supplementary paper today, you said that at that time the estimate was $400 million and now is 1 billion. So it's more than 1.5 times over. So you should have told us that originally what the amount was and how much the cost overrun is. Well, I've been asking you many times and now you eventually give me the answer. This is not good. So it's very, very obvious that there's something wrong with the geo guide. And you are saying that the actual average spacing between the natural joints of the rocks was 1 meter, which was twice as the estimated half-meter spacing. Well, we have seen this many times. For example, the granites and West Kowloon. Well, you know that Hong Kong's geological conditions are complicated. Now, if you will you continue to use the government's geo guide in the future? Now, after these projects, of course, now we have a better understanding of the ground conditions. Now, for the self-financed projects of MTRCL, we can take reference from the past projects and the investigation findings. So for the detailed geological conditions, we can always make reference to this. I'm sorry, the speaker has not turned on his microphone. I mean that for our projects, we can of course make an enhancement, but for government projects, we will have to follow the government's guidelines. I would like to ask members to come to the conference room as soon as possible because the members here have been repeating their questions. In due course, we would have to adjourn the discussion and deal with the 37A motions. Mr. Eddie Chu, Chairman. Well, for the government's paper, that is about the cost adjustment. I have some questions. The Undersecretary says that in 2011 and this year, well, the government comes here to apply for funding for the SCL. And you tell us that you are not using the variable price contract for everything. Well, you use target price for some of the projects, and there are other types of projects. So you are using an Apple method to do the calculation, and you come up with the budget. And when you come to us, you use an orange method. And now there's a cost overrun. And you haven't told us that from 2011 to now how the money has been spent. And you say that because I want to make a comparison. For pages 6 and 7, because we want members to be able to make comparisons, so for the actual cash flow, you convert it into the FC format. So for 2011 and 2017, we've seen the breakdowns for the 2 years, but this is not how the money is spent actually. So I want to ask the Undersecretary. Do you think that the electrical doesn't need to know how you actually spend the money? Yes, I understand your question.
因為呢個問題咧，
Undersecretary, Mr. Chu is very concerned about this. So I'll give you 5 minutes to answer the questions, so that we know whether his concern are well justified. There are 2 parts. First, when we estimate the price adjustments, the cost adjustments, how it was done. I'll ask the Highways Department to explain clearly how this is done. On the other hand, in the way we describe this in the paper, if members think that this is not clear enough, and this is not just a question about one project, it's about the FC format for all kinds of projects. Please ask your colleagues to speak first. I'll ask the Highways Department colleagues to say something about how they handle the cost adjustment. Maybe I can say something about how we come up with the cost estimates. When we do this for a project, we look at past projects of a similar nature using these records as a reference, and then we estimate the cost at the day. But a project cannot be completed in one day. It will be completed in a number of years, and in the meantime, the prices can change. And according to past experience, prices would rise. So if I come up with the cost estimate today, I will have to factor in the increase in prices and other costs. So that's a so-called contingency for cost adjustment, and we'll use the established mechanism to factor in the changes in prices, and before we know the ultimate cost of project. When the FC gives its approval, it's done on the money of the day prices, and the total sum after making the price adjustments. So this is a provision for price adjustments. It cannot be the real figures. It must be an estimate based on certain mechanism. And now at a certain stage, we know that compared with the original estimates, things are not quite the same due to different reasons such as ground conditions, and the time taken might be longer, and we did not expect certain works to be involved. For example, we need to erect a cover for the MOT station works to ensure that it can be carried out around the clock. So it would be more costly, it would take more time, and then the subsequent works to be carried out at the stations would also see prices adjusted. So normally, prices will go up for several reasons. First, the increase in the prices themselves. Secondly, additional works will also lead to higher costs, and the longer time it takes, the higher the price. When we asked for the supplementary provision from the FC, we are calculating at the money of the sums at the money of the day basis, and also by referring to the sums that we are going to pay to contractors. So we have set out the calculation methods in enclosure 4. We are talking about funds or money already paid or to be paid at the basis of money of the day levels. If you want to compare with the original estimates for the same works, for example, in respect of MOT station works, we'd like to compare the actual cost and the cost as approved by FC. We need to differentiate the two to better inform members. And there are additional works, as I've said. If I have to do the comparison, I have to change it back to the original price for better comparison. As for the money that we have to pay the contractors, it all comes from the provision already approved by the FC or to be approved by the FC, and we have taken into account the increases in price, leading to a higher cost.
我都係其實即係同一樣嘢嚟嘅，就但係我先咁講啦，你無論你
Sir James told, whether you're talking about a variable price contract or fixed price contract, there's the element of price adjustments would be compensated according to different mechanism. In 2010-2011, you did earmark a sum for such adjustments. Can I ask whether price adjustments will always be a positive figure? Can the sum or the provision be reduced? But it seems that we are always asked to provide more instead of less. So the prices will just go up and never go down? Who will take this question? Well, this is not always a positive sum. Historically, for some period, we had negative adjustments. If we see prices are going to reduce, we use the same mechanism, and we come up with a negative adjustment, a negative figure. It could happen. In 2011, you set aside $700 million for this. Now you have to spend $500 million more for this project. So in the first instance, you'd set aside $700 million. Now is that some 1.3 or 1.4 billion actually? So are you saying that you are bound to be correct, and we must provide the provisions you have asked for? Or you will be approving the provision at money of the day basis, and that is we'll actually pay so much money for the project. If we want to compare on the basis of the same price levels, and we look at the elements, so we have to convert the present price to the price at 2010 when we sought FC's approval. We wanted to compare the costs on an equal footing. We want to show that the increase in cost due to the additional works required instead of changes in prices. All right, let's say the biggest 10 items for price adjustments. Well, I don't care what they are. I'm talking about positive adjustments, upward adjustments, the 10 highest items. Give the information to us so that we can better monitor the project. Can you tell us why additional works for those 10 items were required, and why they were more costly? Well, actually, such information is in the FC paper. For example, in respect of MOT, it's because of the unfavorable ground conditions. I'm talking about the third item, price adjustment factors.
頭先我講咧，就因為我而家實際上俾個錢咧，就真係付款當日價格。
Well, we're doing this on the basis of money of the day money. That is the actual sum paid to the contractor, and in that sum, there's no part of it that can be attributed to price adjustment. I paid the contractor $100. That's $100. I won't tell the contractor that $90 is for the additional cost, additional work. But you can give us figures. If you say that there's no way you can break down into the three factors, you can only say that I need additionally $100 million. But you can tell us that it's $500 million for this particular factor. It seems to suggest that you can calculate the additional provisions needed for in respect of this factor. Mr. Dennis Guo, do you mind if you allowed if you defer to Mr. James Toh so that he can continue with his questions? Please tell us the 10 highest item for adjustments made in respect of these factors. Maybe enclosure 4 or attachment 4 or 5 and 5 can help members. The project's time was extended, and then there were additional costs because of that. And then we have also looked at the cash flow and the price adjustments and needed. And that's Annex 4 and then Annex 5 or in respect of different parts. SCL or MOT stations, they are breakdown figures.
再問啦，我跟住。
好，唔該晒。羅榮鏗議員5分鐘。
Mr. Dennis Guo, 5 minutes. Thank you, Chairman. I have a question about Annex 5.
講嗰個追討條款嗰度。
That's Annex 5 in today's paper. Who can answer my questions? What are the questions? 4.10 supplementary provisions. And the liability shouldered by the MTRCL, apart from personal injury cases, there's a cap, limitations, 4.10, 4.10A, and that is the compensation pay will not exceed the project, the revenue derived from the project. There's a cap, right? Who answered this question? Under Secretary? The first question. Is there a possibility that the government will face claims exceeding this cap and also under 5.2?
Indemnified government against all actions, proceedings, costs, claims, and demands and expenses, losses and damages suffered by government. 咁呢，但係佢呢度就好似
But there's no cap here for cross 5.2. So how can you reconcile 4.10 and 5.2? Is the cap applicable to 5.2? We don't have the full contract with us. Who can answer this question? I'll ask the Permanent Secretary to respond. Please adjust the lamp. For 4.110 is about MTRCL's liability in respect of theft or a personal injury due to third party. This is unlimited. But if there's negligence on the part of MTRCL, then the cap is the project management cost. The 3 entrustment contracts, year 1, year 2, year 3, they would get some project management fees from these 3 contracts. What about 5.2? They give you this indemnity. they promised to indemnify the government for likely losses or damages. They will compensate you if government suffer any losses or damages. So will 4.10 be prior to 5.2? Yes, they're mutual explanatory. So for 5.2, there's also a cap. That is to say, when the MTRC pays or indemnifies the government, it will not. It will be up to the limit of the fees that the MTRCL would have received from the government. Have you ever have any experience whereby the losses or damages would exceed the total fees payable? We have two entrustment contracts with MTRCL, SCL and the XRL. Mr. Law, Nathan Law, I want to talk about Annex 3. Well, Ms. Chair submitted an explanation, but I'm not satisfied. You're talking about approved projects and approved supplementary provision, which is $710 million, and now this is $800 million. Last time you should tell us the approved funds, the approved supplementary provision, and the original provision. In this case, it's a $300 million. Then we will, if you put such figures together, we'll understand the situation better. For this table, and that is in respect of claims made by the contractor and the government's comments. Can you give us the information set out in such a table? Mr. Chen. Mr. Chen, let me explain what Table 1 and Table 2 are about. That's not a mistake. At that time, in Table 1, the total contains 650 projects, of which 71 required a supplementary provision. It was not about the sums of supplementary provision, but rather the original budget, approved budget. And now the question is about the percentage of supplementary provision, and the answer is 8%. So it's not about the difference of the project cost before and after the supplementary provision was approved. The speaker's not coming through. Don't use the terms approved estimates and supplementary provisions. What about claims? Does the member want to know the views on the claims by the MTRCL or the government? Well, when the contractor files a claim in respect of unexpected costs, would that be itemized information, and then the governments and MTRCL can offer comments on those claims? Highways Department, please. We've given you an example in the paper, and that MTRCL handles variations.
But this is not about a claim. This is about an incentive scheme for the contractor. Well, please wrap up the answer, and then I need to let another member speak about the information requested by the member. I'll see how we can provide this information to the member. 3 minutes, Mr. James Toll. Well, But please stop. I've told you. Mr. James told 3 minutes. Well, Chairman, if you stop him, then another member will ask the same question again. I cannot allow the speaking time limit to be exceeded in such a way. Well, because we only have a handful of members asking questions here, but you should not be out of line. But anyway, I'll be clear. My question is this. You're asking for supplementary provision due to cost overrun, cost fluctuation or variation to the agreement. But the point is, from the member's perspective, I need to cast it out. For example, for the MTLCL, has it done its best for the sake of the public coffers, negotiate with the contractors? Well, for example, there may be reason number 1, 2, and 3, and in particular for the first few reasons, maybe there is a claim, maybe there is a disagreement. The point is how we can be convinced, since the MTLCL is the agent, is our agent in this project, how we can be convinced that the MTLCL has tried its best to negotiate with the contractor over this issue. I think even before I ask this question, the Undersecretary should ask himself, or should ask the supervisory staff overseeing the work of the MTLCL this question. And he should be satisfied with the answer first. Now, I respect the points made by other members, but let's say, well, we're talking about $800 million. It is such a huge sum. So, can you give a list of important contracts with a substantial amount of claim? What are the justifications? How was the negotiation done, and what is the final outcome? Frankly, perhaps your lawyer or your advisor to the project would say that you will lose out. There is no room for further negotiation. And have you resorted to arbitration or mediation? I need to have throw out this doubt because first of all, the MTLCL might think that it doesn't come from its pocket, and even the secretary may think that why he needs to try hard. Please continue to keep Mr. James Toe's mic on 4 minutes, second round. Mr. James Toe, please continue. The fourth round? Well, you spoke for the third round just now, and when you press the button, you're given the top priority automatically. I'll let him answer first. I fully understand Mr. James Toe's point. The Highways Department is the gatekeeper. Of course, the first line of gatekeeping is the MTLCL, but I'd like to ask the Director of Highways to explain this point. Well, to cut you short, Chairman, I want some information. I want to know what negotiation took place between you and the other side. You cannot just tell us that you've tried your best. So let's say for the top 5 claims you have negotiated with the contractors when they demanded some $40,000 million. You countered offered $20 million for the so and so reasons, etc. Without disclosing commercially sensitive details, I'll see how the Director of Highways can explain this point to you. As far as information is concerned, we will see how best we can explain our position without compromising the commercial sensitivity of the negotiation. I just want to point out that for this contract or agreement, it is unique in the sense that it is not just an entrustment by the government. The agreement also includes the parts undertaken by the MTRCL itself, so it also has to fork out money if extra expenses is incurred for payment to contractors. The MTRCL is also responsible for the additional costs, and under such circumstances, I believe that they would try their best. No, they may not want to try their best because this may expose their problems. Mr. Eddie Chu. Well, I'm trying to let you understand what my question is, because otherwise the general public won't understand the point. Now, from the administration's reply, I understand the first part of it, and that is before we decided how the project should be proceeded with, you should use the usual formula, and I understand it. But when it comes to cost overrun, I'd like to have your response on the following. Because the agreement is not a floating price contract but a fixed price contract, and in page 14 you mentioned that in such circumstances the so-called price adjustment contingency for price adjustment, it may be different because let's say if there are unforeseen circumstances not stipulated in a contract, then this will be regarded as price adjustment. Please keep his mic on. Now, if there is cost overrun, you come back to report to the council, and you don't need to compare apple with apple. You can just tell us that fixed price approach has been taken for certain contracts, and for some other projects the cost overrun is provided by the price adjustment contingency. Well, you don't have this information now, but in future I'd like to have this information, and also in the future I want you to express this part by means of cost overrun in such a manner. In enclosure 4, we explained that according to table 2, for the MOD price and the price based on the level in 2010, we provided two separate sets of figures. So I think if we refer to D of table 2, I think this is the figure that Ms. Eddie Ju was looking for. I don't want just a table. I don't want just a final sum. I want to know why, how this final sum has come by. I need to know under various circumstances how supplementary provision or additional expenditure should be provided. There could be different combinations of reasons, and I'd like to have this information. Well, this involves not one agreement but different contracts. I think it's expressed in such a manner so that we can use a consolidated approach or standardized approach to express different contracts. Dr. Edward, you 1 minute. Thank you, Chairman. We can refer to enclosure 3, the Development Bureau's reply. It's clearly misleading in its reply. In Roman letter 3, it is said that as for how cost overrun is calculated, the international standard is to have a very clear nominator and denominator. And moving on to the next paragraph, I think you're misleading the public to think that the percentage is calculated in the same manner as you mentioned in the previous paragraph. But then you also talked about the total sum. In fact, for the table in Schedule 2, you should also provide the total sum in projects with supplementary provisions. But then you deliberately used the other term and stated that the supplementary provision is roughly $600 million. Well, please keep Dr. Edward Yu's mic on. Right, please continue. You still have 1 minute. Let me give you one example. Let's say there are two projects, one with original estimate 100, and then it increases to $10,000 because of cost overrun. The other project, other projects remains at $100. If you use the international standard, then it's a cost overrun of 999%. For the preceding paragraph, you used, and then this paragraph, you have used different method of calculation. There is no way we can understand this. You seem to suggest that you have adopted the international way of calculating cost overruns, but in fact it's not true. Now I don't even know by how much you have gone over budget. I think the paper clearly sets out the cost overrun situation. It's $6.2 billion, and we have increased the amount to $7.7 billion, altogether $800 million extra. So I think that we can refer to the amounts. As for the table, I think that it relates to the performance of our supervision of various public works projects, and it's a different matter. And I think that I can relate Dr. Edward Yu's views to the Development Bureau. Mr. Ray Chan, 1 minute. You're applying for additional funding to pay the outstanding amount. If you're unable to pay them, you need to pay the interest. But if we refer to enclosure 2 of PWSC paper number 43, you have the calculations for various years. So isn't it the case that you would have used up the sum in different years, and now it's time to make that payment? The MTLCL is still settling the accounts with other contractors. It is not the case that the construction cost can be calculated, can be finalized once the works are completed. We need some follow-up work, and that would entail costs. Not to mention that we are already experiencing cost overrun. Well, the final sum should be paid only in 2018 and 2019. But now you're suggesting that if we do not pay the main sum, we will be subject to additional interest payments. Let's say if we're due to pay a certain sum, then we should pay it now, although we still have other payments to make in the future. If we don't pay the sum due today, then we will be in default. For the sum due in 2018-19, has payment been made? No. Right, so it's not yet been paid. But then you have settled the accounts, and that by the end of the month we'll need to pay the sum to avoid penalty. Our position is this: if we need to pay a certain sum by the end of June, then that's the amount we need to pay. Say for the $4.2 million, that is, we're talking about the maximum amount. Well, you provided a table with the amounts in 2017, 18, 19. Does it mean that even when we reach that line, you don't need to pay these sums yet? We're referring to the outstanding amount in the previous year, 2016-17. It's true that we need to make annual payments. Dr. K.K. Kwok, 5th round, 1 minute. We're relying on the government to be the gatekeeper. I'd like to go back to page 16 of the paper. Let's say if the entrustment agreement of Sha-Tin Central Link, the MTLCL, under the agreement is required to manage the project and must do its best endeavor to avoid delays, etc., etc. My question is, how will the government assess whether the MTLCL has done its best endeavor? and that otherwise the MTLCL would be breaching the contract and will need to pay a penalty. Let's say we have some $600 million cost overrun. Does it mean that instead of the government, the MTLCL should pay the additional amount? What has the government done to reach this conclusion? In implementing the project, be it the Highways Department or the MVA consultant supervising the project engaged by the Highways Department, they keep a very close eye on the MTLCL in implementing the project. For example, we talked about claims and every time the MTLCL make recommendations after conducting an assessment, and the MTLCL would need to consult the Highways Department and the consultant first. In the process, we would be able to check if the MTLCL has done its best to implement the project in a professional manner, and we therefore will form a view. Let's say if the MTLCL is unprofessional, we would be able to make this observation, and according to the entrustment agreement, we can make a claim against MTLCL for failing to fulfill the responsibility. Well, we have discussed this item for 11 hours already, members. I can say that many questions have been asked. For example, the EA between the MTLCL and the government already 13 times, and also ground condition and ground investigation 18 times, and that the geo guide should be revised over 10 times already. So I think that I'll give members the last round to speak, and then I will deal with the 37A motions. We have Dr. Helena Wong, Mr. Eddie Chu, Mr. Nathan Law, and Mr. Wu Chi-wai waiting to ask questions. Each will be given 1 more minute, and we'll begin. And if you wish to speak, come down and press the button as soon as possible. Mr. Eddie Chu, starting with you. Altogether 4 minutes. Just now, Mr. Chan said that in enclosure 4 of the paper, it provides very useful information for the committee's reference. My question is whether you can give me more information in relation to different contracts in this project, constituting the different reasons for cost overrun, because I need to have more details in this regard. I am not saying that we don't need the comparison in enclosure 4. I just want to know the details of the contracts and how they constitute cost overrun in general. Mr. Cheng. Enclosure 5 gives you a breakdown of the different works involved in the project. And initially, when we applied for funding with FC, we prepared some figures, and enclosure 5 gives you a comparison. I think that this should meet Mr. Ediju's request. But I say otherwise. I ask a very specific question. The point is, you're not really acceding to my request. There are different ways of approving a contract. And as a result, when there is a cost overrun, subsequently, the reason for applying for additional funding may be different. I'm talking about enclosure 4 and enclosure 5. I just want to have more information other than the apple-to-apple comparison in these two tables.
I can give you the information after the meeting. Well, I hope he can promise me that he will do that. And for pages 14 and 15, for example, page 14, in 2011, well, the project was given to MTLCL, and MTLCL does things a bit differently. Now, if MTLCL used a fixed price contract or a target price contract, so when you first started to do the calculation, would the items breakdown be different in monetary terms? Now, when we prepared the estimate, it had nothing to do with the contract format. Now, I want to ask the MTLCL, why do you want a fixed price approach? Because you want others to shoulder the risk and then you can take the advantage. So how come there is no difference in price? If we use a fixed price contract, fixed means it doesn't mean the amounts that when we get the money. Well, the contractor would have to consider different things. For example, in the coming few years of construction, the price would vary according to time. For example, now the price is $100, but if the construction works is to be conducted in 3 years, then eventually it will be $120. So the contractor would not use $100 as the contract price, because in the coming 3 years he will have to pay more than $100. Although it's a fixed price, but it's not fixed at $100, it's fixed at $120. So you are projecting for the future. You want to shift the risks to other parties. So if you use the government's approach, then it's $120. But for the MTLCL, you actually want it to be lower than $120. If eventually it's $120, then I don't understand why you want to use the fixed price approach. Now, there are different contract formats, and they all have different considerations behind them. Now, if we want the contractor to bear the risk, then the risk must be at an acceptable level. Now, MTLCL said that if it's a high-risk project, and if the contractor has to shoulder the project, if you want a fixed price, then the contractor would fix it at a very high level. But for relatively low-risk projects, then if you use the fixed price approach, then the company or the government can be protected. That is, they do not have to shoulder so much risk. And the most important thing is that when they return the tender, they would consider the price variations in the coming years. This is also a risk. Next, Helena Wong, 4 minutes. Well, just now I haven't heard the answer from the government or the MTLCL about this. That is about the contract. For the grounds investigation, if the findings are different from the actual conditions, and if it turns out to be better, will the price go down? Now the condition is worse, so you want more money. So would the government always have to pay, and it has nothing to do with the contractor, MTLCL? Well, for ground investigations, there are 2 groups of people that are responsible. One group is the geotechnical engineers. They have to design the investigation scheme. And they would also have to commission an investigation contractor to carry out the investigation. As for the registered engineer and the investigation contractors, if they follow all the requirements, and if no mistake is made, then they would be considered compliant with the contract. So who should be responsible for this discrepancy? For in the investigation findings, they just show the ground conditions of the investigated site. Now, if the site is not complicated, then the geotechnical report would be more accurate. However, if the ground conditions are complicated, then the investigation findings may not completely reflect the actual ground conditions. So it has nothing to do with the engineers. It's the government's business, right? MTLCL? Chairman, I have answered this before. For the geological situations is for reference during the tendering exercise, and the contractor would have to look at the geological reports when it makes the tender. But the amount of work will not change. Well, the ground conditions won't change because of your investigation. Maybe you don't have enough samples, you haven't dug deep enough, right? The ground conditions would not change suddenly. MTLCL. Yes, the ground conditions would not change. And for the investigation work, we would just know the conditions of the investigation points, and then we will have to deduce what the underground conditions are. If the geological conditions are complicated, then there may be discrepancies. So if it's the MTLCL that made inaccurate investigation, how come the MTLCL is not paying? Well, for the investigation reports, we will have to rely on it to decide on a method. And yes, the ground conditions would not change. So if the investigation report is correct, of course there won't be additional work. But the investigation cannot fully if the investigation cannot fully reflect the ground conditions, then this will be reflected in the actual works. Mr. Nathan Law, I want to ask about the price adjustment provision. And when the government makes the calculation, it would have to take inflation into account. When the MTLCL signs a contract with the contractor, it uses a fixed price approach. So it would also include a provision for price adjustment. Now, if this approach is adopted, then the estimate would be lower than the inflation. Otherwise, why will you use this approach? If you want to share the risk, why don't you use a contract with fluctuation? Because the MTLCL hopes to have a contract with a lower price. Now, if the government has set aside a huge amount of money for the provision, then if the amount is less, then where has the money gone? And also for additional funding, I think this is a bigger problem. The government says that the provision has to be increased. It's because the construction period is lengthened, but it has nothing to do with inflation, and it has to do with the claim. you shouldn't increase the provision for price adjustment because the provision for price adjustment is just about inflation. So why do you come for additional funding for price adjustment provision? Are you using the money for other purposes? For example, dealing with contractors' claims? And because of project delays, there may be additional costs, so you have to pay for those. So are you really putting the money in price adjustment provision? MTLCL. Thank you, Chairman. Well, during the tendering, the contractor can choose between fixed price and variable price. No matter what he chooses, we have to adhere to the contractual spirit. That is, it will have to shoulder the risk. And during the original construction period, the price cannot be adjusted. If it's variable price, of course, that can be done. Well, the contractual spirit is like this. During the tendering, you have to decide on whether it's a fixed price or a variable price. But if there's extra money, what will the MTLCL do? And I hope you can answer this question, and also the questions about additional funding. If it's a fixed price contract, then the price cannot be adjusted. It's the contractual spirit. However, if there are changes in the contract and if it's not their responsibility, and because of such changes the construction period is lengthened, then of course there will be a price adjustment. It may be higher or lower, because we will have to look at the actual situation to decide on the price, and that would be reflected in the whole additional amount. I think he's giving us a lecture. He hasn't answered my question. So for price adjustment provision is about inflation. How come when the construction period is lengthened, you need more money? I think they can explain to you after the meeting. This is a very complicated issue. Maybe they should come to your office to explain to you. He hasn't answered my question, Chairman. Well, don't try to blackmail me with an adjournment motion. I understand your concern. Don't try to drag all the projects. I'll give the MTLCL several more minutes to answer the questions. Well, I always try to guess what you think, but I'm always wrong. Okay, who's going to answer the question? Mr. Chen? Chairman, if the construction period is prolonged, the works being carried out later would see a higher or bigger price increase. So when we do the calculation, and if there are changes, then we will have to look at the actual market price. If I do it today, I'll have to look at today's price. And today's price is different from the 2010 price. And as a result, there is a difference. So if we compare it with the price at that time, today's price is different. So what we give the contractor is the market price today. Mr. Leighton Law, I asked 2 sets of questions. He just gave me half an answer. Maybe we can talk after the meeting. Mr. Wu Chiwai, 4 minutes. Well, for this price adjustment mechanism, many questions have been raised. We've been reading public works documents, and we've been told a lot about price adjustment mechanism. but we do not know what kind of contracts we are talking about. Is it a variable price contract, fixed price contract, or what? From the government's perspective, for these different types of contracts, how would they affect the cost control of the relevant projects? And when you submit papers to us, shouldn't you be responsible for explaining such contracts to us? In the past, I haven't heard about this. I haven't heard that there are different formats of contracts. And for these different contracts, would there be different monitoring approaches? And as a result, the Highways Department would adopt different monitoring methods. When you decide which types of contracts to be used, would the Highways Department talk to the MTLCL and agree on the type of contract? And when it comes to supervision, because there are different types of contracts, would the supervision be different? Because you have to ensure that public money is well spent. Highways Department. Mr. Wu, you asked about different types of contracts. And when it comes to controlling the cost, whether there would be differences, this involves complicated issues, and I cannot explain to you very briefly. So maybe we can prepare some information for you. As for the different types of contracts, they do not affect our supervision of the MTLCL. We adopt the same standards. When they carry out the projects, do they do it professionally? Of course, we would monitor them. So it doesn't matter which type of contract is used. The monitoring mechanism is still the same. So if it's a fixed price contract, then when you monitor them, you would have to be very careful because you do not want VO. But if you use a variable price contract, then there may be a lot of variables happening. So there are a lot of things that may change. So that's why I think that when you monitor them, your focus may be different. Well, I've told you just now that the standards are the same. But Mr. Wu is right. For different types of contracts, in particular when there are changes in the works, then the process may be different. For example, if it's a target price contract, then the contractor would have to provide a lot of information. For this type of contract, when we do the monitoring, no matter whether it's at the MTLCL or us, the information we can see is different from that of a fixed price contract. So the focus of the monitoring may be different.
因為我哋時間夠嚇，請你問啦，請你問下。
我淨係想，所以其實就係政府喺攞錢嘅。
So when the government seeks funding support, it must tell us which approach will be more appropriate. Please give a succinct answer. in monitoring, there are many details to work on, but there are different contractual approaches which may affect how you supervise or monitor the works. So when you seek funding's approval, you have the duty to tell us that for this particular project, which approach would be most beneficial. And don't just tell us that the entrusted party, that is MTRCL, would be doing this. All right, this comment. Yeah, you please note the comment. Yes, I will give a more detailed account in due course. Please return at 5:25 p.m.